listener production.
Hey, Tara Cassidy with you and welcome to The Briefing. Sonia Kruger, Hamish Blake and Julia Morris are among the nominees for this year's Gold Logie. You might feel like you've heard this roll call before, and you'd be right. It's not their first rodeo. They've all been finalists or won it before.
The industry is small and networks traditionally are risk averse, so they would much rather flog a tried and true success story than take a risk on something new.
That deep dive into this year's Logies and whether it's still relevant is coming up in the second half of this episode. First though, let's get into the headlines with Dan Mullins. It's Friday the 20th of June.
Hey Tara, and to you listening, we're starting in the US, where the White House says President Donald Trump is preparing to decide when to join the conflict between Israel and Iran.
Based on the fact that there's a substantial chance of negotiations that may or may not take place with Iran in the near future, I will make my decision whether or not to go within the next 2 weeks.
That's White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt quoting the president.
The news comes as a top Israeli official declared Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah al-Khamenei can no longer be allowed to exist. Defence Minister Israel Katz made the comments after an Iranian missile struck a hospital at Beersheba in Israel's south, injuring at least 40 people. He said Khamenei openly declares that he wants Israel destroyed. He personally gives the order to fire on hospitals, and such a man can no longer be allowed to exist. Meanwhile, Israeli President Benjamin Netanyahu visited the hospital.
Israel is fighting to remove the nuclear and missile threat aimed at our annihilation. We're targeting military sites. We're targeting nuclear sites. We're targeting missile sites. They're targeting a hospital.
Foreign ministers from Britain, France and Germany, together with Kaja Kallas, the European Union Foreign Secretary Policy Chief, are scheduled to hold talks with their Iranian counterparts in Geneva today. Chinese President Xi Jinping spoke with President Vladimir Putin of Russia overnight. The pair called on the parties involved, particularly Israel, to agree to a ceasefire.
Yeah, and it's worth noting that the Australian embassy over in Israel has actually closed, and we've got 1,500 Australians in Iran and 1,200 Australians in Israel that are seeking help to leave right now, which we heard from Penny Wong yesterday.
And that number has more than tripled since Monday. So we're being told, anybody listening perhaps in the Middle East, get in touch through Smart Traveller.
A man who worked with hundreds of children will front court next month following allegations of inappropriate behaviour toward kids. He was charged by the Australian Federal Police in October last year with various criminal offences where he was refused bail and has since been in custody.
More than 1,200 Sydney North Shore and CBD families have been notified about the employee and are continuing to inform any with children that may have come into contact with the man. Some parents were told police felt it was unlikely the alleged behaviour of the employee directly impact the recipient's children, rather that it was only carried out against a small number. However, that hasn't qualmed the concerns of many of those parents, as you can imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, we're not legally able to identify this man yet, his place of work or the children involved, and I'm just putting that out there because often the media gets questioned when they don't identify people accused of these kinds of crimes online. That's all been given a strict non-publication order by the courts. Now, this man will return to Sydney's Downing Centre local court on charges of possessing child abuse material next month.
Australia's got the green light to use age verification technology as part of the country's world-leading under-16s social media ban. Following a groundbreaking trial, the tech was found to be private, robust and effective, with its preliminary findings to be unveiled today. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese announced the new age limit in November last year in the hopes of reducing the negative effects of social media on young people, including their mental health.
Yeah, and that's come amid soaring rates of anxiety, depression, eating disorders and all other kinds of harm among Aussie teens that we've seen in recent years. The age verification trial has so far analysed various checking methods from over over 50 different organisations around the globe, and they're looking at whether they're able to accurately tell a user's age and prevent children from harm. Now, the findings show there's no significant barriers preventing the tech from rolling out, and while the people behind it have said it's not perfect yet, there are still some little things that do need to be tweaked and fixed. There are various aspects of it that are working well and ready to go right now. Now, it's important to note that the government said they know this won't be the be-all and end-all solution to stop children from being harmed online, but it is at least a step in that direction, isn't it, Dan?
Yes, look, when the new rules are enforced, it'll mean Meta, which owns Instagram and Facebook, TikTok and Snapchat, will get slapped with hefty fines, $49.5 million, if they don't take reasonable steps to stop underage kids using their platforms. And we know they've been called out in the past for being aware of many of the issues, even crimes going on via the use of their apps, but not doing enough about it. So it'll be interesting to see if they get on board.
A tough day at the office for the world's richest man, Elon Musk. One of his SpaceX rockets exploded during a test at the company's starbase in Texas. That's the moment the Starship 36 had what the company's called a catastrophic failure.
The mega rocket was still attached to the launch arm when it exploded. Starship is the world's largest and most powerful rocket and a key part of Musk's dream to reach Mars.
Yeah, and now, look, Musk is just palming this off. He's posted on X this morning saying this is just a scratch. Well, it's one way of looking at it, Dan, but another one of the rockets actually blew up over the Indian Ocean a couple of weeks ago. So I wonder if...
They're insane.
I don't know if they're quite there yet.
They're over 120 metres tall, these rockets. And this phase of Musk's space dream, as it develops, he's hoping to test one of these every 3 to 4 weeks. Like, he's got a lot of dough.
Now, we want to again finish off the week with you guys, our listeners. We chucked a few polls up in our broadcast channel behind the briefing this week. The first was about that Sabrina Carpenter album cover that's caused quite a stir online. Some calling it out, saying it's wrong, you're a role model, what message are you sending to young fans? Others saying it's fine, it's satire and it was meant to stir the pot and get people talking. And that it has. And so we wanted to ask you guys what you think.
Yeah, a couple thought it was empowering. More than a quarter of you thought it was problematic, while well over half of you said you just don't care. The other question we asked you guys was your thoughts on lab-grown meat after news that it's making its way to Australia and set to be served up at some of our fine dining restaurants in the coming months. And this one, well, it was much more divided.
Yeah, that's right. There was less than a fifth of you said, yay, you would be giving lab-grown meat a crack. A bit under half of you said, nope, you will not be, gave it the big old yuck, while majority of you said, you're on the fence. Maybe. Perhaps you need to see what they look like cooked, and you might have got put off by the raw chicken nugget lab meats I saw the other week in the photos. But Dan, have you ever seen what they actually look like, this lab-grown meat so far, and what do you think? Are you going to give it a crack?
No. I'll try a falafel from time to time, okay? But no, I'm a meat and 3 veg man, and that's how you get a voice like this. It's not AI.
Oh, gosh, no, definitely not AI. And the smooth, velvety voice of Dan Mullins. You heard it here first, meat eater through and through. Thanks, Dan. Thanks for joining us on the briefing this morning. And that brings our headlines to a close for today. Next up is Chris Spiro's Deep Dive, looking into the Logies. Is it relevant? Is it rigged? What's the go? Have a listen to that up next.
And the Logie goes to...
And the gold Logie goes to...
What do you think? Should we give out a Logie?
It's billed as Aussie TV's Night of Nights, the Logies. The 65th iteration of the awards night will be hitting our tellies in August, with all the latest nominations announced this week and voting now open. But with a bunch of the usual suspects leading the noms, it raises the all too familiar question: who deserves to get rewarded and why? And in a media landscape that's shifting fast, with shows being cancelled and streamers dominating, is the Logies anything more than just a glitzy relic? Alex Fennell is a veteran TV producer who's worked on shows like Home and Away, MAFS and The Project, and she is the host of the podcast That's Showbiz Baby. She joins me now. Alex, welcome back to The Briefing. Why should anyone care about the Logies in 2025?
Is nothing sacred anymore? Of course we should care about the Logies. I feel like it's really cool within Australian culture to bag the Logies. It's like no one cares. But it's the one event where we get to actually celebrate our own homegrown talent, Australian stories, Australian TV. We're not American. The Oscars, the Emmys, they're not us, you know? And so the Logies is a celebration of Australian iconic TV and personalities and all the hard work that goes into the industry, the often forgotten television industry. Won't someone spare a thought for the industry?
Yes, everyone spare a thought. You know what? The industry, though, has never received more chatter and conversations around it than in the last few weeks, thanks to The Project and Q&A. I mean, tragic circumstances, but, you know, a lot of people have been thinking critically about the Australian media industry, which brings me to my next question. Talk to me a little bit about the role of industry votes. I know that the Logies throughout the years have been accused of having biases towards certain networks. Channel 7 is hosting this year, so I'm sure there will be some speculation and accusations of bias towards their talent. What's the role of industry judging and why is that important in an award show like the Logies?
It's the urban myth that always follows the Logies, isn't it? That it's rigged. The Logies is rigged. And I think that stems from back in the day when the only way to vote was via actual coupons that you got out of TV Week magazine. Because we've got to remember the Logies was invented or introduced by TV Week. It was the TV Week Logie Awards and it still is. So traditionally, you could technically rig it by buying a bunch of magazines, and they do suggest that publicists used to actually do that for their talent. So that's kind of where the whisperings of the rigging has come from. But in recent years, they have introduced elements to prevent it being rigged. So, for example, now there's obviously technology involved, but now they do have a combination of audience voting, you can only vote once, and peer-reviewed select panels. Networks that have the resources to run larger scale campaigns, that is also a way that it's kind of unfair. So, you know, for example, Channel 9 might run a huge campaign on their social channels. They'll invest money in Facebook ads and promoting whoever they want to get up. So it's also a resource game, but that's like most things that are vote based, right? You know, politicians, they get money and investment, and the people who get the most investment often get voted in. So it's kind of a combination of things.
Yeah, but I mean, with politics, for example, the end goal is that you end up becoming a member of parliament or the prime minister of the country. Alex, what does one get if they win a Logie other than a shiny trophy to put on their bookshelf?
Nobody wants a Logie until they're nominated for a Logie. It's just the glory of being able to say, I won a Logie Award. You know, I still think that holds merit.
To the industry, though, does that play a role anymore? Do awards and accolades mean anything in the Australian media landscape? I'm curious to know. Does it mean anything?
We've also got the ACTA Awards. So the ACTA Awards are traditionally considered within the industry more of a respectful, because it's peer-reviewed, it's industry voted, whereas the Logies is a combination of audience votes and industry votes. I would say an ACTA award is probably more reputable when it comes to industry recognition, but it can't hurt, because having a Logie, if you've won a Logie award, it means you're popular on some level, which then means that networks are more likely to want to include you in their shows further. So I would say it does help, absolutely. It doesn't mean nothing. You know, say somebody's auditioning to be the host of a show and it's coming down to 2 people and one has a Logie, they're probably going to get chosen because they're tried and tested and they've won a popularity contest, essentially. So yeah, I do think it has merit.
Well, which brings us to kind of a secondary criticism, or another criticism of the Logies, is that it is very much just a popularity contest as opposed to a true reflection of the talent pool and the talent that we do have in Australia. For example, this year the Gold Logie noms are Sonia Kruger, Julia Morris, Hamish Blake. They're among the list. These are all people who have been nominated. Some have won before. What's going on?
So I know, I agree. Hamish Blake has been nominated 7 times and won on top of that 4 times. So he just dominates. Hamish does have a cult following. He has excessive fandom. I don't believe that there's anybody in Hamish and Andy's camp that are continuously putting Hamish forward. I don't think that's rigged. The Hamish and Andy podcast is still the most successful podcast in Australia. So that's why he keeps getting nominated.
And I mean, after all, he is our Lego master. The man is everywhere. I am curious to get your read on it. He is the only guy in a female-dominated Gold Logie list this year. Any thoughts or reactions to that?
Yeah, I think he joked, I've been stitched up here, because if he wins, it's going to be pretty awkward, I think. I remember in 2022 when he won, he was up against MasterChef's Melissa Leong, and she ran a really amazing Gold Logie campaign, and she was really honest. She was like, anyone who says they don't want a Gold Logie is lying. I want it. And she fought hard and ran a great campaign, and I thought she had it in her to win it. And then Hamish won it against her, and I was like, oh. But this year it really has gone too far. If he wins it, I think he'll probably do something hilarious and funny about it. But yeah, I would love to see Poe win this category this year.
Yeah, well, it is interesting because it's opened up kind of the door to some people to be talking about this. I'm not going to pretend like it's a conversation that stops the nation. You and I both know that. But an interesting take that I heard and that I was kind of curious to get your read on is people saying that perhaps the way that this Gold Logie finalist list has stacked up, the fact that there is just one man and it is a female-dominated list, almost feels a little bit performative.
Potentially that's what's gone on. They're trying to stack it with women to ensure that a woman does win it, to kind of counteract the fact that traditionally a lot of men have won it, although Sonia Kruger has won it already in 2023. Carrie Bickmore won it. Women have, of course, won it over the years, but yeah, potentially it is performative. We can only speculate. There are some general rules we know, but the secret recipe for how they actually select people will never truly be revealed unless somebody from TV Week wants to talk about it.
So let's talk about somewhere where there is development in this space. It's no longer free-to-air shows dominating these nomination lists. We've got a bunch of shows from the streamers. So we know Netflix's Apple Cider Vinegar, Heartbreak High and Territory are leading some of the noms. Is it a promising sign that the Logies are catching up to how people are actually consuming Australian-made TV?
Absolutely. I think it's so good that we're including streaming platforms. Last year, Boy Swallows Universe cleaned up the Logies, and that was a Netflix show. That was an Australian-made Netflix show, and that won 5 awards. So the Logies has been keeping up with streaming categories. It would be crazy not to include that. I think that that's great that they're keeping up with it.
Yeah, not to get too philosophical, but for someone who's listening to this and is kind of like, ugh, I don't care. Why is that important? Why is it important to be putting forward the case for locally made films and TV shows and things like that?
Because the industry has been decimated recently, and the industry matters to the creatives in Australia. We're such a small country in comparison, and we have such a small industry. The arts is always the first to be decimated and, gutted for funding. Entertainment and something that brings joy to us, it matters. We can't always just be embedded in hell and destruction. Sometimes we need to celebrate the joy and the power of storytelling, the power of Australian stories. Who else is going to tell Australian stories except the Australian TV industry? We say Australia doesn't have a culture. We do. The Logies is Australian culture.
Even to build onto that, and I'm not even, I was thinking about this in the lead up to this chat because I was thinking, well, why do the arts and why do award ceremonies matter? I think for me on a deeper level, they signpost where we're at as a society. I think, yes, we can talk as much as we want about politics and the election. That signposted something for Australia, the rejection of the Liberal Party. I know I'm taking it somewhere that it doesn't have to go, but I think award ceremonies also indicate to us, everyday Australians, where we're tracking as a society, what we value, the stories that we want to tell. So yes, I'm hopping on the train and I am joining the celebrations around that, more streaming and more Australian stories are being platformed in this way. I do want to ask you though, you mentioned there about the Logies kind of being this iconic part of Australia's entertainment landscape. Can you talk us through some of the iconic moments that stand out for you that have kind of left their imprint on pop culture?
Well, the first one that comes to mind is Carrie putting on the beanie when she won gold. She put her beanie on and did a shout out to her husband who had passed, and then that kicked off Carrie's Beanies for brain cancer, which has gone on to raise millions and millions and millions of dollars. Additionally, Samuel Johnson, when he won, he dedicated his win to his sister Connie, who had died. He raised a lot of money for that. And then, of course, you've got Tom Gleeson hilariously trolling the Logies for how many years until he finally won. There are so many of those iconic moments, and you don't get that kind of stuff except when you've got a room full of Australia's funniest people on live television.
Is it really Australia's funniest people or the ones that the mainstream networks value and place value on? Actually, which brings me to Sam Pang, actually. This is his third year hosting. Does that man not have enough TV shows? Does he really need another award show to be hosting on television?
Yeah, that is a good question, but the people love Sam Pang. He's Australia's version of Ricky Gervais, isn't he? He's not afraid to actually dish it back, dish it to the audience, dish it to the industry. He doesn't take the fact that he is in the industry too seriously, and I think people quite like that. But yes, of course, as with Australian media, they do tend to oversaturate. They find a success star and then they put that star everywhere. But the industry is small. It is very nepotism driven, and networks traditionally are risk averse. So they would much rather flog a tried and true success story than take a risk on something new. It takes a lot for a show to take a risk on completely new, unknown talent. So that is kind of where they play it safe.
And we might leave it there, Alex, before we get ourselves both into trouble. Alex Fennell, thank you so much for joining us again on The Briefing.
Thank you so much.
That was veteran TV producer and host of That Showbiz Baby, Alex Fennell, speaking with me there. That is it for this episode of The Briefing. Don't forget, we'll be back in your feeds with another episode this afternoon. And of course, the weekend briefing will be in your feeds from tomorrow morning. I'm Chris Biru. I'll catch you next time.
Listener.